Hey guys, Mr. O'Brien here, and in this video what we're going to be talking about are the effects of limiting factors on population dynamics and potential species extinction. So what limiting factors are there factors in the environment that affect the number of individuals in a population? So let's talk about that first. So the things that are actually going to affect the number of individuals in a population are birth and death rates. Now remember, birth rates are when we are increasing the number of individuals. Immigration is another thing that's going to increase the number of individuals for the overall size of the population. Now, things that are going to diminish the population are things like emigration, where they leave the population, or even deaths, like they're eaten by a predator. So populations are going to be affected by these couple things: birth and death rates, immigration, and emigration. Now remember, immigration is when they are coming in, emigration is when they are leaving. Now, what type of factors would affect the birth and death rates of a population? So, in other words, why are some years does it seem like there's more deer than other years, or why there's more bugs in some years? So the things that are going to affect that are things like the availability of food. The better the food source is, the better chance a mother has of delivering a healthy offspring that will be able to survive. Population of predators. So obviously if the population of predators is up, what that's going to do is knock off the prey. Same thing, when the predators are down, the prey are going to have an increase in numbers. Some abiotic factors like water, shelter, disease. Again, these are things that are going to affect. So obviously if there's a lot more disease, we're going to have a lot less numbers, as well as random weather events. So obviously if a tornado comes through and wipes out the population, again, that's something that actually occurs at a random chance. Now, population growth take a couple different curves. And when we're talking about these curves, we're talking about the number of individuals in the population. So as their ecosystem and community change, populations of the organisms undergo different growth patterns with it. The most common one we have is the S curve. Now the S curve would be this right here, where the population begins to grow rapidly, and then eventually it kind of levels out. Now again, a logistic growth takes the shape of an S curve. You can kind of see that in the blue outline right there. Now, what happens with logistic growth is we continue to grow until we reach a certain point. This certain point is when environmental resistance kicks in and our population begins to steady because of that environmental resistance. And that number of where or what the population can support is called our carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is just simply how many organisms can be carried in a population. So again, logistic growth starts off fast, but gradually slows down as that population encounters some sort of environmental resistance. This could be the amount of food, the amount of predators, and environmental resistance takes two forms. The first one we have are density-dependent factors, such as disease, which affect dense populations more. So a density-dependent factor is something that's going to be determined by how thick the population is. So think about it, right? If we have a population where the individuals are very spread out, okay, something like this, obviously it's going to be very hard to transmit disease between them. But think about like a herd of buffalo or even humans during the flu season where they're all packed in like in your school, right? The close contact means that that disease is going to be able to spread a lot quicker. Again, that's density dependent or dependent on the number of population. Now, density independent factors are things like natural disasters, like hurricanes or tornadoes, again, or even just climate change. These are things that are happening by random chance. So really, if there is one individual, or I should say two individuals in the population, or in another population, like up here, we have hundreds, and a tornado comes through, it doesn't matter if there's 100 or if there's two, that random event is going to be what kills them. Now, density-dependent growth limiting factors will cause the population growth to slow and eventually stabilize. Again, we call this point of stabilization the carrying capacity, or the maximum population size that can be sustained by an ecosystem. So in other words, I like to think of it like a basket, right? So the carrying capacity of an ecosystem is like a basket. So if if the food, the space, all that stuff is great, all those limiting factors are really good for growth, the basket's bigger. We can fit more individuals in there. But let's just say we go through a time of drought or we have habitat destruction. Now that basket shrinks and that population can no longer support as many individuals. That's what we're referring to as carrying capacity. Now, exponential growth is something that doesn't happen too often. But what exponential growth is when it takes the shape of a J. And you can kind of see that J right here. So in other words, the population grows so uncontrollably and it pretty much goes straight up. Again, there's they experience no limiting factors. So this is kind of like what bacteria does in a lab. They just replicate and replicate and replicate. Now, when the population will continue to grow, it'll eventually exceed that carrying capacity. So if we look here, this point right here obviously is our carrying capacity that we have there. Now, when it is over that carrying capacity, we call it an overshoot. So obviously think about it like it's the population is going overshooting that carrying capacity or the number of individuals. So what do we expect to happen? So when we have an overshoot, what happens is the population can no longer be supported and the population then begins to die back off. And consequently, call this a dieback. And again, this is when the population overshoots the carrying capacity, it dies back off, the population now is under the carrying capacity. Now, usually this occurs because there's a mass starvation or something along those lines. So exponential growth is very unusual and does not typically occur under normal conditions. And what's eventually going to happen is we get to a point and let's just say the population really can't support it. So this is actually how organisms can go extinct as well. We can overshoot and we eliminate the resources so drastically that our population will crash and eventually cause extinction. Now, sometimes what will happen is the population will begin to stabilize and then we get our normal S curve as well. But overshooting or exponential growth could cause some sort of extinction event because the organisms are going to use up the resources extremely quickly. There won't be anything left to happen. So hopefully this helps you out. Again, this was part 7 of your topic 8 ecology chapter. Again, this is Mr. O'Brien signing off.